Welcome to Eastern Europe's Minorities in a Century of Change, a podcast on the history of minority experiences in Central and Eastern Europe during the 20th century. This series is part of the Institute of Historical Research Centennial Commemoration, Our Century, Looking Back, Thinking Forward, and has been organized by the Study Group for Minority History. It was made possible through the help and support of the British Association of Slavonic and East European Studies and the Stanley Burton Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the University of Leicester. The Study Group for Minority History is a forum devoted to researching minorities in the national and regional histories of Central, Eastern, and Southeast Europe and promoting closer scholarly collaborations. For more information, please visit our website at studygroupforminorityhistory.com. I'm Olena Palko, the co-convener of the study group, and today I will be talking to Professor Morgane Labbé at the EHESS in Paris and a senior research fellow at the Polish Institute of Advanced Studies in Warsaw. Morgane, welcome to the podcast. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in Central and Eastern Europe?
So, first of all, thank you very much for these invitations. And I'm very glad to give an account about my research and interest in this Central and Eastern European history. So I will develop the issue of my interest because, of course, everybody asks me, why are you interested in Eastern Europe as a French historian? So it's a long way. So initially, I must say, my interest was mainly in the German history and came from early contacts with Germany, with the German language that I learned in the college, in the school travels. So I am in a way the third or the second generation of the French-German politics reconciliation of the post-war. And then in my studies and my university career, this interest east of the Rhine, east of France, shifted eastward to Central and Eastern Europe under two events, we know them, that were on one side the collapse of the communist regime, and on the other side, the resurgence of nationalisms in Eastern Europe. So it was a European event and turmoil. And I must say, I tried to think about it. And in a short time, the issue of nationalism took in France a new and a growing place in the social science. And especially in France, where the nationalisms were not topic at all, were really absent, even in the political science. I was thinking social classes were really the dominant category, and there is no place to think about nation and nationalism in the social science. But because of the two events, the landscape, the academic landscape changed very quickly. And I remember, for instance, one book released, the book of Ernest Gellner, Nation and Nationalism. It was a success and it was very quick, translated into French. You can imagine of the audience of the readers. And I remember also, I was also studying ethnology, and there was a course, a lecture on nation and nationalisms given by a professor of an older generation. I don't know why he decided to open this seminar. And we were just a few students, but we were completely fascinating because he decided to introduce us to the fundamental text, not only Ernest Gellner, but before the ignored, the forgotten fundamental text of Hans Kohn, Renan, Stuart Mill, Max Weber. At the same time, there is a new literature on nationalisms from the Anglo-Saxon countries. He decided to remind us there were texts in the past. And it belonged to the older generation. He translated Max Weber, I don't remember exactly. He was trained in philosophy. So it was really a luck for us to be introduced to this text. And it went back, I remember the first session, the etymology of nation, natio in Greek, and nation. It gave us a text to read, really to feel it really as a concept in history. So it was really a fascinating course, and it gave me suddenly a new insight in political philosophy and political thought. So it was really a change in social science. But in this period too, precisely the polarity put forward by Hans Kohn between the cultural nation and the political nation, this conceptual with the ideal type of the French nation and the German nation, was called into question, because Hans Kohn was really, he decided to build his model. It was just during and after the Second World War. He wanted to understand what's going on with the German history. And it was, and 40 years later, 4 decades later, this strong first attempt to give concept of the different definition of nation in Europe was also called into question, in particular with a work like Ernest Gellner, a European or worldwide book of Roger Brubaker about the two models of the French and the German citizenship, the political and the more cultural and by heritage filiation. And the book, Brubaker's book, had also a strong echo in the French academic. And it gave an impulse to the work of French historians, not to discuss this opposition, but to discuss the so-called undisputable French citizenship. And there was still living historian, Gérard Noiriel. He gave a new definition, a new insight of the so-called political citizenship of France, and it reveals evident how in some time, like the Vichy government or in the colonial perspective, there were also in the French citizenship elements of ethnic origin taken into account. There was also criteria like different origins. So it was suddenly within 5 years, maybe, an emulating new context for scholarship. I would say empirical as theoretical, a multidisciplinary context, because all the social sciences were concerned by the issue. Sociology, anthropology, history, political science, there were books everywhere. And of course, it encouraged the students like me towards these new fields, to investigate this field. And I was also studying demography and population statistics in that time, and I discovered it was a critical decade, I must say, everywhere. And I discovered in the library of the Statistical Institute all the collection of the population census of Europe. So there was a circulation during the 19th century and then in the 20th between the statistical office, and there were all the collections just at hand, and just open the census of Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and Romania, and we can see it was full of tables with nations, categories. So a wonderful source to investigate. So this is the beginning of my interest. So this is a way, and then I didn't left the road. I stay on the road.
Let me perhaps just build upon of what you just said and ask you about the role of statisticians and maps in the nation building in Eastern and Central Europe. I would perhaps restructure a little bit our conversation, but I think it grows very well on what you just said, on those population statistics that you just found and discovered in Paris when you started being interested in this region. So I was just wanted to ask you about the evolution of scientific knowledge in the imperial context. And one of the major events of the late 19th century was the unification of Germany in 1871. And then we have, obviously, after the Second World War, the new nation state. But what role did statistics play in the process of political consolidation of major European empires before the First World War?
Before, you mean, okay. You mean the role of statistics in the imperial context? Yes, okay. So I have, in fact, I know little about the history of science in imperial context because it's a very large field. But for my own research, at the beginning, I was not interesting, especially in the imperial statistic. I was more interested in the role and the power of statistics in state building. But because of the empirical materials that I gathered, mainly from the Austrian, the Prussian censuses, I discovered how the imperial context was important. And I discover difference, significant differences between just the German, the Prussian statistics of the 19th century and the Austrian statistic exactly in the same times. While usually, because it's just the so-called German space of Europe, they are both considered as the same. But actually, there are very significant differences. And in my research, in my book, and emphasized in particular what I call an imperial model of statistics. And I try to define it, I would say, empirical, with the materials, the statistics, the census, and the maps. There were maps in the imperial statistic, while in the national Prussian statistic, there are no maps, maybe one, but maps are not belonging to statistics. So the imperial model of national or ethnic statistic is the following. It is not a quantitative statistic or little quantitative. It's more a narrative, a textual statistic, but it is above all a taxonomic, a classificatory statistic, and also topographical. The geographical, the spatial dimension is always important, so the map. And statistic is not only made up of a table, it's, I could say, by the example of the Austrian statistic I just developed afterwards, there is a map, there is a books, this is the historical dimension, and there are tables. So the books is a narrative, and the table, these are some figures, but also words, classification, and the map, this is a spatial dimension. So we have sometimes three components that are named statistics, and they are named in the Austrian tradition, not national statistic, not multinational statistic, not imperial statistic, but ethnographic. But in the mind of the Austrian statisticians, ethnographic is a title, is a name, a word only for the empire. So they were International Congress of Statisticians, and in one session, it was about, so in this Congress, the statisticians tried to standardize and unify the criteria and the category of statistics. And once it was decided to discuss about nationality as a criteria for the population census. And in these discussions, the director, the head of the Austrian Statistical Office, developed the project of what he called an ethnographical statistics. And at the end of his talk, he emphasized that this kind of statistic is very restricted, that only for the empire, the Austrian, the Russian, and the Ottoman. It didn't apply to the other states. He refused to apply, to extend, to open this ethnographic statistic to all the states. So it was quite a failure, and the issue was closed at the international level. So this imperial model, what is important in this imperial, so this imperial model, the importance is not to quantifying the strength of the empire, so the strength of a multinational empire, or to quantify one nation by contrast to another one, but it is the issue, the concern is to represent, to represent in a classification or in a map the nationalities as in the order of the things. So I use this expression, in the order of the things, or l'ordre des choses, came from Foucault. It is a fixed classification. It is a fixed order, like in the nature. So it's fixed, it's stable, and this makes the empire stable. So like a painting. And this is the issue with this classification, to find a good classification, and when the classification is given, it is forever. Each nationality is in its place in the classification, each nationality is in its place in the map, in the space. And and this model, I explained, so I developed in my book, is complicated to define, but it has also an origin. It is actually a model developed in the 18th century. This is the Enlightenment, when statistics became a discipline in the German university. And the Enlightenment statistics were absolutely not quantitative. It was descriptive, it was taxonomic. This was the model of the science of the state, the model of the cameralisms, teach in this German university and then spread in Vienna or in St. Petersburg. And then it was appropriated by these universities, and but it changed also. So in Germany, this Enlightenment statistic disappeared in the 19th century. The Prussian statistic became completely quantitative. No maps, no text, just numbers, criteria, mother tongue, and just to calculate the proportion of the Polish inhabitants to the German inhabitants. So this kind of quantitative was already this relation, this number relation to measure the strength of each nation. But you don't have, but this Enlightenment model persisted. I don't want to say survived, because it was not a survivor, but persisted in this imperial context. And so I developed my argument because I discovered it in the empirical material and collection a very monumental map, which is now known. This is the ethnographic map of the Austrian monarch, made up by the Karl von Zernig, so the head of the Imperial Statistical Office, or in Vienna. So this is this statistical ethnographic map. It was made in the statistical office. And this map was typical of the neo-absolutism period in Austria. It was achieved in 1855, just after the failure, the repression of the 1848 revolution. So it was like a response, a reaction of the national movement of the 1848 revolutions. Instead of these claims to be a nation with the first, this nation in movement, revolutions, to ask for representation in a new parliament in Frankfurt, etc. It was a reaction. What is multinational? It is just something given in the map. It was really a fiction. This map is a fiction because it's very aesthetic, it's beautiful and colorful. And as Turnig developed in the text, there is no nation dominant. They are like an equilibrium. Multinationality, it's just an equilibre. So it's just a fiction after the revolution. So, and I qualify this statistic imperial because I didn't study a lot the Russian statistics because I didn't speak the language and with the Russian too. But I found that in the same times, there is reference in certain books of a map of von Kippen for the government of St. Petersburg. And it was exactly the same principle of map, text, ethnographic, and they corresponded each other. So they became to the same cultural and scientific model. And then I read a little the works about the Russian census of Juliette Cadio and other scholars, and I discovered that the geographical dimensions, the ethnographical expedition were always very close to the census. They all work together when it comes to count the population of the empire. So that's the reason I think there is really an imperial model. And I think also in the 20th century, as far as I know through the works of Alan Bloom, etc., with the Soviet census, there were a lot of discussion about the list. It was important for the nation to be in the list, first of all. And even Stalin says the list will be cut here, will be long as this or not. So there is the importance of the list. And you don't find anything with the list, with the national quantitative population census. There is no list in the Prussian census. There is just categories, Polish, Mazurian, etc., Danish, that's all, and proportions, everywhere proportions. So it's completely different problem. And the point in my book, my argument, is that this imperial model didn't pre-existed. It was not a survivance, but it coexisted with a national model. And I conclude that both models were prevalent in Europe until the First World War because they provided, they were like ideal, they provided the states, the other states, even out of Europe, with two different and possible ways of making up nationalities. Classification of figures, map, graphic, etc. And they give the state. Any states were interesting with a national issue at the turn of the 20th century. They provided with a knowledge available, ready to be used for a national policies, because there is a lot of concern with borderlands, with assimilation, with exclusion, with colonial settlement. So it was just two models, and some states choose this way, others choose another ways. So this is my argument. So they coexisted. So I hope I have answered to your question.
Thank you. Just maybe to say to this, based on my research, I'm working on as you know, on the Soviet Union and Ukraine. And indeed, it seems to me, based on what you just said, there is a lot of continuity between the imperial and the Soviet tradition, at least in the 1920s. Because the ethnographers were really very much engaged, and the institutes of ethnographic research and a lot of scholarly publication. This was really kind of the heyday of ethnography in the kind of Soviet context. So it makes me think, indeed, like there are many more continuities than we tend to think. Also in expertise in science. But I wanted to continue, and most of your research focuses on the period of transition from empire to nation state in Eastern and Central Europe. How did the role of maps and census change in the context of nation states? What role did census play in ordering populations in interwar East Central Europe? And why every new nation state was so eager to invest in cartography and demography? What were their political considerations?
Okay, so what did maps and census change in the context of nation states? I was beginning with 1919 in Europe. So it was quite simple. There is one political model, the nation state, which was promoted, not to say imposed, by the victorious powers of the war to the territories and population of East Central Europe. Maybe also with agreement with some national leaders, but it was completely imposed already in the peace conference. There is no place for another model, even a federal, what we say a federal model, so a more liberal imperial model, or I don't know, but so the role of the maps and the census was completely in line with this model. It was this model had a diplomatic recognition. And I just recall that in the peace conference, it was there were already a lot of maps and statistics used in the experts committee. Of course, it was also a fiction that the maps would decide about the new nation and their borders. But there were expert geographers mainly using a lot of statistics and maps, and so they open the road how to use the statistics. So they use the statistic in one way to legitimate, so not already, but here it's not to represent, it's just to legitimate the new nation state and its border by one principle, the majority principle, the statistical majority, like used. There is like a confusion. It was the majority principle is also a political principle of democracy. The majority decides, decision by majority, but they use it like it's an objectivation. So it's not. We don't decide, the majority decide. So this is the reign and the victory of this kind of reasoning, the objectivation for political purpose, of course, because you can build a lot of different majority according to the category you consider and the division and the borders. So this is first a role of maps and census in the new nation state. So, and then in our period in the 30s, there is another role of these census and maps. It is to be tools, I would say, to be instrument to conduct a policy, a national policy, especially in these Eastern countries, very still mixed country, I could say. So a policy of always the same, of assimilation, of colonization, of displacement or exclusion, in particular in the borderlands. But so I will develop a little to my arguments. I think that the first census, often they are ignored because they were conducted just after the war. So the figures, the results were not very good. They were defective. But we as historians, we have to take seriously the first census because they are still belonging to the first period, the imperial time, and they are already in the new period. They are really, and how do I say? They capture something of the transitions. So the first census, they had also, so we don't have to forget it because the victorious powers were still on the place. And the first census has to respect the treaties on minorities by granting them rights, representations, so political representations, and also before statistical representations, because numbers decided about it. And so for all these reasons, the post-war census, the first one, were not very different from the pre-war ones. So if you see all the censuses, they were conducted in 1921, 1920, 22, you find exactly, this is a model of the pre-war, maybe because the statistical office has no time to design a new questionnaire. And because, as far as I know, the Polish case, all the statisticians working in the new statistical office, they worked beforehand in the Austrian, the Galician office. So they just take their experience in the Polish office. So this is the same question quite about nation, so direct question about language, mother tongue, about religion, and the same exclusivity to reject bilingualism, to reject the possibility to declare two nations, to the importance of language as a criteria. So there is no difference. But why these new states were nevertheless eager, impatient to conduct a census just so close to the war? The war was devastating. In some places, like in Poland, the border were not fixed. They were still fighting at the eastern border. Some of the prisoners are still on the way to come back. So the fate of some provinces were not yet decided because of the plebiscite. But anyway, they decided to conduct a census in this very bad condition. But because it was absolutely an important operation, a symbolic operation, it was the first national census. So of course, it has to legitimate the national foundation, but with the own numbers. Not only because until this census, all the figures, the statistics about Eastern Europe came from the statistical office of Germany, of Russia, of Austria, and all they were on the other side for the victories. It's very interesting to read the discussion in the Paris Peace Conference. All the English or French expert, American, were very didn't know how to work with his enemies' statistics. It was German statistics. We have only German statistics to decide the border of the new states. So it was like a paradox. And so at the point of view of the symbol, it was important for the states to get their national numbers. So, and it was, of course, a symbolic institution, and it was, how can I say, it was a way to institute, to make the nation by the census. Eric Hobsbawm emphasized the role of the census to make the nation in move, like the school, like the military. So it is a mass movement in a way, because all the population is counted, is numbered. It is in the same date with the same question. And in a way, it's with equality, all individuals counted for one. So everybody is participating. It's a participating at times with a lot of campaign, with poster, you have to participate, etc. So this is the symbol of the census, and it explains that the states decided to undertake it despite bad conditions. And but you also address the issue of demography. You use the word, and I must say that demography is another issue. Demography was at that time, especially in the interwar period, a distinctive science of population, distinct of population statistics, and even for censuses. It has to do with reproduction, with natality, with mortality, with reproduction. And in this interwar period, this view, this conception of population, this quite biological conception of population took a major and a particular place, a new importance. And it has also an impact on the definition and the approach of the nation. It gives an increasingly vitalist and organic conception to the nations. We imbued with eugenist and biological, also racial ideas of the nation. And it is important also to address the issue of demography as far as we discuss of nation and nationalisms. But because what came in this is a new national discourse, that a populous nation, a large population, it's not enough as a condition for a nation to be valued, to be a strong nation. The nation must be also as an organism, healthy, vigorous, efficient. So it's there. In this definition, demography is an important science. So I will distinguish population statistics with the census. So the census is a source, is an operation, and demography as a science, quite a biological science of population that also played a role during this period in these new states. We see it also with Romania, with eugenics, the power of eugenics. There was really a national eugenics, as Marius Turda emphasized, in Eastern Europe. This with the aim to consolidate the nations with some biological basis. So I don't know whether I am clear, but I think it's also important. So in this, I will use term demography really in this more restrictive meaning, direction.
Thank you. I wanted to continue by talking perhaps a little bit more in detail about some aspects of your research. So as you also mentioned, and in your publication, you show that the transformation from the world of empires to the world of nation after the First World War was not straightforward. And I want to ask you about the process of self-identification of the diverse population that found themselves as part of the new nation states. National indifference is a widely used concept to determine the nature of the region at the turn of the 20th century. And there are also attempts to use this concept to characterize the interwar period. And in your research, you came to consider a category of tutejsi, or the people from here in the interwar Poland. Could you tell us more about those tutejsi and how this category was transformed during the interwar period? Do you consider tutejsi to be so-called indifferent of their ethnic status, or is there something else to understanding this process?
Yes, thank you for your attention on my tutejsi chapter. This very special study that I give about this micro category. So the tutejsi, it was first of all for me an enigmatic category of the Polish census, the both of 1921, and then again, it's enigmatic in 1932 in the second population census. An enigmatic category that emerged in the tables. And the categories, you have a national tables, a national belonging or a national language, and all the national category, and suddenly one column is tutejsi. And this is just what I call a detail. I don't understand. And the detail, of course, they are always sometimes very important, because here the detail of the table allows to enter what I say the census factory, the census making. With the tutejsi, we can open a little door, a little window to enter, to open the black box of the census, because the census and all these tables are like black box. They are completely closed. It's impossible to see what's going on behind the table. And thanks to such a detail, normal, contradictory. You can just open the curtain and look behind. So that was the first reason of my interest. And I must say also, it's important to take into account that it's often forgotten that the history of censuses is, so historically, the censuses were punctuated by such defects that disrupted the logic and mechanics of the census. So you have always false declaration, under declarations, omissions, and a lot of indeterminate answer. And when the indeterminate answer are too big, the statisticians decided to name the indeterminate. And yet there is one famous example, more recent, this is the Yugoslavian population census, when with the category of Yugoslavians that appear in the classifications, it came up that maybe in the census in the 70s, there were a growing number of the population that didn't declare the national categories. They declared to be Yugoslavian or any something like that. But at the beginning, the population office, the statistical office, codified, gathered this answer as indeterminate out of the category. But because the number was growing, they had to identify it, to give a name, and they were Yugoslavian. So I don't know whether the indeterminate were before in Yugoslavian, but they changed it by Yugoslavian. It was not a national, but they used it. And in the next census, there were a growing number of people declaring themselves to be Yugoslav. So it was typical also of this generation coming from mixed parents, for instance. They didn't feel comfortable with the choice of to be Croatian, Serbian, and they say, so we are Yugoslavian, just like that. So this is an example how the census, the statisticians manage with the reality sometimes wins against the construction is stronger than the building of the statistics. So I was always attentive to such enigma. But Tutaishi has also a translation. It's not only an indeterminate. So, and the translation is to be from here. I am from here. And so it's not so a surprise. This is just an evidence of local identities. And populations that identify themselves with the place where they're living, it came in other places too. It is what we call a local or regional identification. And it's frequent also today to meet such a reference answers. It's also a problem for the statistical office. So just take the Polish census, when part of the population in the south declared to be Silesian, but also in French, when the part of the population in Brittany declared to be Britons. And they say, we identify with our region or province. So it is also a political manifestation. So it's quite frequent. So Tutaishi, I would say, belong to this kind of identification at first. For me, it's not such a surprise. But it's surprising because why didn't they give us particular localities? They could say we are from Polesia, or I don't know, but I'm from here, so it is a relative identity. I'm from here now, but after I'm from here and another place. So this is a relative identity, but the anthropologist has found such identities also in other countries' lands. It's not impossible. I would say too that there were certainly in Eastern Europe, so in this Polish census, other communities, population that reported this kind of belonging. For instance, in the first Polish census, I just read it in the in the text or in the archives, part of the population in Galicia decided to declare to be Galician, to react, to be against Poland. We are Galician, we are not Polish. But it was not published. So of course, we see that one of the reasons of the category in the publication is political. So Tutaishi has no such a political importance. It's quite nothing. So Galician has a political meaning. Tutaishi has no political meaning. So my work was a little demonstrative, and I said there was a puzzle, an enigma, and it's twofold. First of all, the puzzle. What is the populations that didn't declare a national ethnic belonging in that time when national belonging was so important? How could they defend a non-national? How could they resist? So this is a real question. And the second question, the second puzzle, is the statistical office. Why the statistical office didn't modify, didn't correct this answer? It could just share, so just say indeterminate, or just share the answer between various categories, say 1/3, 2/3 to Belarusian, to Ukrainian, to Polish, and they disappear, but not, they didn't do that. So it's a real question too. So this was the question of my research. It was a small research, and I was limited by the source. So I had access to central source, but I decided to keep on, and I follow, I would say, the institutional explaining way. Why? Because I found reports. There was a report of the statistical office. Of course, he had to explain what's going on, what is it about. So there is, the statistical office disagree with the categories. He said in the next census, we will have resolved the problem. It's because the first census, but it disagree. But it was not the only institution to decide. And I was interested because often the statistical office is considered like a panoptic, governing by numbers. Not. There is a lot of institution with a state institution, with scientific legitimations. And it turns out that for the national statistics, the statistical office had to cooperate, to work with another institute, the Institute of Nationalities. And I found a report of this institute about the issue of Tutaishi in the census. So it evidenced that the questions were discussed between experts, between scholars at the time. And the Institute of Nationalities defended another point of view. It decided that the category must be published, must be published at per se, without an argument, a strong argument, that these populations living in the borderlands, peasant communities, the reality was that they were without national consensusness. And to declare a population without a national consensusness, it was not new. It was, how do you say, a common word. It's in the peace conference, when you read the report of the expert about the population of the Ruthenian population, for instance, they were qualified without national consensusness. It was very simple. A population without national consensusness has no voice. We decided they had no place, no voice, no national consensus. And it was also meaning that the national consensusness is a process, a long process. So these populations are still changing. They will change because they are still integrated in the states. So of course it was political oriented, but we have to wait until they get the real national Polish consensusness, but just to respect it. And so it was so this reasoning, and this reasoning won against the statistical office. And it was also my explanation of the publication of the category in the census of 1921, and also in 1931. The statistical office explained in 31 they disappeared, but in 31 they don't disappear. There were more numbers than before. But there were, of course, of political reasons. It was in the borderlands. It was a way also to let the population out of discussion between the other states. So there were both. But I would like, in my research, I go further, because until this point, I give the explanation from the point of view of the institutions. But I didn't answer the question, what about the population? Are they really population without national conscientiousness? Are they really population who identify with the place where they're living and with the changing place of where they are? Who are the population? So what does it mean to voice no place for no national belonging? And I start to read a little about some explanation by mainly by Polish historian like Jerzy Tomaszewski. I appreciate it very much, but I was not very satisfied with the interpretation of the answer. They consider that it was, so it's not wrong, but this only explain this answer as a strategy of these communities to avoid allegiance to a state by a national declaration, especially in these borderlands, because the population could fear to change. They were used to change of dominations. And then it was a strategy to avoid any reaction and hostility of a new dominations. And there was also the interpretation, it's a manipulation by the states. But in the same time, I discovered the research works of ethnologists. So ethnologists were also very interesting. So I don't know why, but by these European peasant communities at the periphery, it was the field of ethnologist work. And two Polish scholars had made a very significant research on this population of Polesia. The one was an ethnologist of the past, of the interwar period, Józef Obremski. It was a former student of Malinowski. He did his PhD in the London School of Economics, so it was a very good ethnologist, and he made a very good field work about the Polesia population. And then in the present time, there is an linguist, ethno-linguist, Polish one, Anna Engelking, and she did a lot of through the language, she studied a lot in deep, really in the grassroots, this population, and both converge to recognize peasant communities where the identification with the place where the people live is more important in the identity. It is a kind of identification. So I didn't develop more, but I was convinced by the argument. And that time I said, it's real, it's not a construction. Of course, it was a convenient way to close my chapter because a real research should have been keep on the local source, but it was too much complicated for me. It means to look register, maybe church register, administrative local report in Russian, in language that I couldn't read. So it was too much complicated. And my chapter remains a demonstration, I would say, but with some results anyway.
Thank you, but it also suggests that more research should be done and is possible. So I think it's a good way, you know, your chapter, your article is a good way to open, you know, a new research, not field, but, you know, sort of ignite research interest of other scholars in this category. Maybe very briefly touching upon your new research, which is on welfare association and social philanthropies in Eastern Europe. And given the focus of our podcast series, could you reflect on the impact of ethnic diversity in the region on the provision of welfare? How did access to welfare provisions depend on the person's ethnic confessional status, if at all?
Okay, so I must say that exactly this specificity of, I would say, multi-confessional, multinational Eastern Europe societies that are the reason of this new research on the welfare organizations. I was interested to study how these different societies in this society, divided society or stratified society or multiple societies, the welfare organization developed a different trajectory to the welfare states. How much these confessional and national belonging shaped the way to produce, I would say, a modern, a large-scale organization of solidarity, redistribution, etc. I always use the word of culture of redistribution. So solidarity and help are not mechanic. So and the issue of welfare, I would say, it's help or solidarity beyond the family, beyond the small groups. So this is the challenge of any state or province, how to produce a large at the state scale solidarity, help, redistribution, etc. And I was also very unsatisfied with the theoretical works about the welfare state and its emergence, and the works based on concepts like those of Esping Anderson, because with a lot of typology of the welfare states, because these strong theoretical works were built exclusively on the Western European countries, and they consider also a very strong and exclusive hypothesis to the emergence of a welfare state. It's a quite a normative definition. So, of course, they are very strong. Welfare state, it's always in a liberal democracy, in a nation state, because they argue that the nation is the best community to make the redistribution efficient. So there is a lot of argument, but they put it at they didn't try to open the frame to the Eastern society. They excluded a large part of Europe and of the world. And I think today we are discussing about global history, global welfare, and it's time to think about a reconceptualization of the history of welfare organization out of this model. So maybe to read it. So this was a challenging beginning of this research, and it's still an ongoing research. And I have just I don't have a definitive answer, and I couldn't really answer the issue of national belonging, because I'm working with the Polish societies, and until now what I've collected it is material about association and philanthropies, either out of any belonging, completely open, or confessional organizations. But I think that in the future, into the developing of my research, I will find also the issue of nation with the welfare organizations. But what I found very interesting and unexpected with these Polish materials about philanthropy and association is to find new associations created at the end of the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, which insisted to be open to poor families, to children, to give care and help without consideration the nation or the confessions. So I was very interesting to see how there were also a secularization in the welfare early in the 20th century in the Polish territory that took the issue of the social question, as a way to overcome to the national belongings, communities. And it was, of course, associations created by doctors, biologists, so typical of the hygienist movement. But we see how they really express something, I would say, a kind of social citizenship. The social issue is common to all communities, to all confessions, and we have to be solidaire, to secularize. So I developed a lot about one association, Proplam Lega, which insisted always about this openness to all the children, all the confessions. But in the same time, it's always more complicated as expected. The traditional associations, the charities, whose distribution was reduced to one category of population, the Jewish, the Catholic, and maybe the other ones. They were probably discredited by the new association, the philanthropy, but they transformed as well. They adapted as well. They appropriate new principle to redistribute, to help. So they remained confessional with their ideals, the definition of charity, of giving, of helping. But when it came to distribute the provision to the families and to the poor, they could be open. So at the beginning, I had in mind an opposition, traditional charities and modern philanthropy and voluntary associations. And now I think there was a range of associations in a competitive relationship, of course, but claiming to be adapted to the social issue of the modern times. And I think it's interesting because I was thinking first the way of secularizations and modern citizenship, and I think maybe there is another trajectory without secularization in Eastern Europe. And I would like to take more into account the development of these confessional associations. They were powerful as far as it was, for instance, Catholic order, very powerful associations, and transnational too, because the orders, they were in Italy, everywhere. So I think I'm always looking for an alternative trajectory, but it's not just secularizing or not, multi-confessional. It's probably more complicated. But there are still another question that remains if we want to really study well the issue of welfare organization in Eastern Europe. This is a question of practice. What happened in practice? And maybe there were criteria in discourse, but in practice it could be different. And at the turn of the 20th century, and then came the First World War, there were a lot of misery, a lot of groups in precarity, a lot of orphans, and the demands of the populations, the pressure, the revolts of the population were great. And I think that in sometimes the association changed and adapt because they were under the not to say the violence also of the social group when it came from hungry of children, of poverty and misery during the First World War. They didn't want to hear about criteria, age, religion. They just want to have food, to have care. And they make also the association changing. So it is a more interactive process of transformation than we can believe when we just read the statute and the report of the associations. And it is also a search of new source, because I discovered in the archives there were a big register of population recorded. So there is also a way to make a social history of welfare organization, not only a public policy history with typology of laws and criteria, but really make a social history of this social welfare. So I hope I answer to the question.
Thank you so much. This is fascinating, and we are looking forward to read more based on this your new research. And we are running out of time, so perhaps I will just jump to our last concluding question. You mentioned some names already, but could you perhaps recommend where can people go to learn more about the topic, perhaps like separately on on the statistical knowledge, and perhaps if you could consider maybe some interesting works on welfare, like social history of welfare, if you could give any recommendations.
You mean on this last topic of welfare?
It can be on either, because we spend a lot of time discussing this, the role of statistics, and maybe you could recommend some works on that too.
On the role of statistics, so I would recommend to read first of all the works research of the historian of science. If you read Lauren Daston, the historical epistemology, what is statistics? If you read Lauren Daston, Ian King, Theodore Porter, Trusting Numbers, Alain Desrosières, maybe also Michael Eric Briand, you have all the epistemological tools, categories to understand the use of any statistic, economic, national, ethnic, racial, why statistic could be used by dictatorship, but also by very liberal the government. So you have to, it's important to start and also to have this epistemology. Number is not, essentialism is dangerous with race, nation, etc. But it's also dangerous with technologies. There is no power of technology without men and women, so without people, so, with power or not. So this is my recommendation.
Thank you, and we perhaps will include some links or suggestions for our listeners. Thank you so much, Morgane, for joining us today. And it was my great pleasure talking to you about all these diverse topics.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope I was enough clear. It was not so easy to speak in this foreign language as I am in Poland and try to fight with another foreign language. But I'm ready to answer also any question by email or by private email. So
yes, we will include the details for our listeners.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you once again.
Thank you.